Improving Wayfinding in a UK Higher Education Institution Library by Bernard SCAIFE and Geoff Walton. So the impetus for this research was as follows. As a practitioner on the inquiry desk of an academic library, me and my colleagues had noted the frequency that we received questions relating to where to find a book. This led me to develop a prototype mapping system which was well received by staff and students. It indicated where books were and which shelf to go to. I then started a Masters by Research at Manchester Metropolitan University in order to develop a wayfinding system and conduct a study into its impact. I wrote a PHP-based mapping system called ShelfMap and was allowed to install this into Goldsmiths University Library as part of my Masters research project. The hypothesis was that by introducing the wayfinding app, we would find a discernible improvement in the ability and experiences surrounding the finding of items on the shelf compared to beforehand. The objectives were as follows: to review and critically assess the literature in order to understand wayfinding issues and approaches to resolving them, to assess the impact of students' experience and study level on their ability to find material, to explore the impact of introducing a wayfinding app with physical signage on the ability and perceived experience of locating such material, and to indicate the study's contribution to the field, making recommendations for future research. So let's start with a definition of wayfinding from Mandel: the ability of users of the built environment to navigate through that environment to find specific destinations. And in our case, that destination is books in a library. In the literature, wayfinding issues were identified. So Mandel and Hahn and Morales observed that humans find wayfinding stressful or frustrating. Schmidt found that it can lead to heightened anxiety for library users, a link between low self-efficacy and an avoidance of challenging activities correlating with less inclination to develop information literacy competencies has been made by Ross, Perkins and Bodie and clearly relates to wayfinding. In terms of problems finding items, user confusion in finding physical items is well known. Jenkins talks about how a popular question asked of shelving assistants is, "Where is the book?" Kress says that early on in their university careers, people don't really know what a class mark is for. Why isn't that class mark in the catalogue where they see it a clickable link, for example? They're expecting to find further information so they can find out what this code is and what it's for. And Murphy found difficulty in decoding class marks by students. Looking at the literature on building navigation, way back in 1969, Best observed that building navigation is hard for people, and some of the techniques used to improve it in the library world are as follows. Spatial syntax: this is about observing the paths that people use when they are in a building and wandering around, and then planning key focus points, such as your help desks, meaningfully around those natural flows. Casey and Stevens have talked about the possibility of dropping Dewey Decimal System and perhaps trying to use something that users may find more intuitive. Carr and Hahn and Zitron and others have suggested improving signage is important. Signage should be bigger and more judiciously placed. And Schmidt talks about touch points. So this is from a more user experience focus. As you go through the library, there are these touch points that help you move from one area to the next. In terms of technology, basic wayfinding technology has been around for a while, and experiments have been conducted. So Lee and Deng used maps in the library catalogue to show where a stack is located. Various communications technologies such as scanning QR codes or barcodes to find where you are at a given moment in the library in order that it can give you some directions to your destination, i.e. where the book you want is, have been tried. However, these have had a lowish kind of adoption rate as none are all that easy to implement or use. There are difficulties in making the system granular enough for it to still be useful. And things being worked on such as SatNav, which would take you to the exact point of where the book is located on the shelf, are probably some way off because of technical limitations. Hahn and Morales conducted research that showed that handheld devices were positively received. Mobile devices, of course, allow you to consult the map en route. Research methods. So a mixed methods case study approach was taken for this research because we were looking for depth and were prepared to sacrifice generalization for that. The components of the research were, first of all, a Qualtrics survey, an online survey, was done to provide a broad baseline of our audience's characteristics and an indicative view of their broad perceptions about finding material on the shelf. The main research component were semi-structured interviews, which are described by Galetta and Cross as lived experiences as narrated in the interview in relation to theoretical variables of interest. These were designed to be built around a field exercise in which the participants were asked to find 4 items in the library, only 2 of which allowed them to use the app. Finally, some log analysis of ShelfMap's use in the library over the 4-month period was conducted. So the site involved was Goldsmiths Library and Academic Library, which is part of the University of London. We used convenience sampling and chose 6 subjects from the population, using book vouchers as an incentive for them to participate. We tried to recruit an even number of undergraduates and postgraduates, and in the end we ended up with 3 of each. We used cognitive mapping at the start of the semi-structured interviews in order to help people to relax. So this is a technique where people draw what they feel about finding items in the library before we've conducted the field exercise. And as you can see from this image of one of those, the way this has been drawn sort of reflects some of the language that came out during the research. Words such as ominous and anxiety-inducing, for example. The field exercise, basically this is a screenshot of one of the 4 items that somebody was asked to find. In fact, it's task 1. And 2 of the 4 tasks had no shelf map button on it at all. And we used concurrent think aloud protocol to basically be able to capture what the participants were thinking. They're basically thinking out loud as they wander around, and this was recorded with consent on audio. So we embedded the field exercise within those semi-structured interviews deliberately because we wanted to allow comparison of levels of self-efficacy before and after the exercise. We used Kerber-Noglu and Al's 28-point scale, and in particular C8, which is locate information sources in the library. The interview recordings were codified using an iterative process, which is described by Tracy. And these on the screen are the main themes which emerged. So looking at the findings and starting with the survey, we got responses from 69 students, roughly divided between undergrads and postgrads. 58% of them stated they were in the first year of their course at Goldsmiths. 52% of them had used the library once a week or more, and 74% stated that they felt confident about finding books on the shelf. 26% had received information literacy training relating to the finding of books. This is about the same as what Larson and Tartakas found during their wayfinding study, which was 30%. It means that quite a lot of students are not being reached by IL training in this respect. And no one had at pre-university level received any training in finding books. In terms of seeking help, the most popular strategy was to ask a librarian. 87% of the 24 tasks that were undertaken were successfully completed, i.e. the book was found, and that compares well with research by others such as Eaton and Carr. The table on the screen now shows the average time in minutes and seconds per task by participants in the field exercise to find the stack in which an item is located. And that time saving was on average 47 seconds or 39% against not having the app available to help them. We found that if the directional flow of shelving stacks was broken, interrupting the sequence, that this caused participants problems and slowed them down. We had companion signage, which is the blue signs that you see there, and those same blue signs appeared on the ShelfMap app. And we found that there was a blurring of the physical with the digital environment. Users were looking at the app and then looking up and making connections between the aisle numbers depicted on the app with the signage they were spotting on the stacks themselves. Lobby signage, however, was underused or simply unnoticed, possibly due to its small size, which chimes with the research by Hahn and Zitron. In terms of help strategies used, when participants ran into difficulties during the field exercise, there was little evidence of a wish to consult library staff. On the other hand, there was a desire to help oneself, coupled with quite an impressive level of resilience. One person described the need to just look harder. For emotions and feelings, we already know that there are negative emotions associated with wayfinding: claustrophobia, anxiety, frustration. Recall that cognitive map that we saw earlier. Introducing the app appears to reduce the perceived stress associated with finding items and increase self-efficacy. 66% of participants use more positive language to describe the process of finding material afterwards, compared with before the field exercise. And see the quotes here. Two students self-declared that they had special learning disabilities. One had dyslexia and one had dyspraxia. But interestingly, they still both found the app to be beneficial to them with time savings of 35%. The dyspraxic student mentioned that it had been very helpful for her to be able to place herself in the space by looking at the 3D model that was on the screen. Unfortunately, these things were actually outside the scope of this study, but it does indicate that further research in regard to specific learning disabilities and their use of such technology would be beneficial. Looking at the usage stats over the 4-month period, there were 13,500 requests, which compares quite well with the loan stats from the library for the same period and indicates a demand of some substance for this service. So turning to the conclusions, students find it rather more difficult to find the stack than to find the item itself when they get to the stack. In regard to predicting the ability of students to find the items, experience is a more significant factor than study level. Students find a book more quickly with the app than they would otherwise do, although it has an only marginal impact on changing the eventual outcomes themselves, i.e. whether they do or don't find the book. Introducing a wayfinding app improves self-efficacy, reduces anxiety, and improves the perceived student experience. And as I said earlier, those with special learning disabilities benefit from the technology almost as much as those without. So, effects on information literacy. In terms of the effects, low attendance levels at information literacy induction sessions, as reported in both my research and by Larson and Tartakis, suggest that students' wayfinding problems may not always be effectively addressed through the traditional learning routes. The existence of a wayfinding app such as ShelfMap at the point of use, i.e. when they wish to retrieve an item in the catalogue, can mitigate the adverse effects of that. By providing assistance which reduces anxiety and cognitive load, the student is given a better chance of a satisfactory outcome, which builds self-efficacy levels. The same can be said about the reluctance to seek help because an app provides an alternative digital self-help option that was previously not available. Thus, the question can perhaps be reframed as to what extent can the app supplement existing information literacy skills training? In terms of limitations, this case study gives a good indication in small to moderate sized university libraries, but cannot be safely applied to other settings without repeating it. Unfortunately, we were unable to recruit PhD candidates as none came forward, so the results can only really be applied to undergrads and postgraduate master's students. The key recommendation is that academic libraries introduce an online wayfinding system with companion signage which matches aisles displayed in the system. It should be embedded in the online library discovery system so that it's available at the point of use. Other recommendations: take a moment to ensure that your end stack signage is maintained and accurate. It wasn't always during the field exercise, and it was clear to see that this can materially affect outcomes. Place prominent maps within lobbies and areas of key wayfinding decision making. For example, where visual distance is restricted, and perhaps where there are multiple choices for directions. If you come to a lobby, there's 2 doors, which one do I go through? Ensure that you have a signage policy that's been developed and hopefully involves users in its creation, because this builds on this study's experience that a student perspective offers a unique insight into the problems of wayfinding in the library. Review location information included in your library catalogue records and make sure you've only got relevant information displaying. Declutter it and make sure it's all contributing to the user being able to understand how to find the item, as opposed to irrelevant or non-contextualized information which just causes confusion. For future research, well, since the research, ShelfMap has actually had a complete rewrite, so it's now using a 3D model which the user can move around and match their current location within the space. Is there further discernible difference based on this more accurate spatial perspective? That would be an interesting research topic. We've talked about the impact of specific learning disabilities. Clearly further research would be beneficial in that area. Keep a watching brief on developments in the area of indoor navigation. There are organisations working on the ability to use satellite navigation and other technologies inside buildings. These are not really yet accurate enough to be used in a library shelf mapping setting, but if that was to change, there could clearly be benefits in incorporating that into library wayfinding and doing research on that. Thank you very much.